Let me bring in Brett Bruen. He was the Director of Global Engagement in the Obama administration, a former U.S. diplomat himself. He's worked with many of the diplomats that have spoken to Congress so far as part of the impeachment probe. Brett, thank you so much for your time. Let's start with Jennifer Williams here. An aide to Vice President Mike Pence, she's testifying tomorrow. President Trump lashed out against her on Twitter, writing in part, "Tell Jennifer Williams, whoever that is, to read both transcripts of the presidential call and see the just released statement from Ukraine. Then she should meet with the other never Trumpers who I don't know and mostly never even heard of and work out a better presidential attack!" Exclamation point. You work closely with Jennifer Williams, as I understand it. First of all, is there any truth to her being a so-called never Trumper?
There isn't. In fact, she worked on the Bush-Cheney campaign before joining the Foreign Service, also for former DHS Secretary under Bush, Chertoff. And then in addition to that, she has served just prior to coming to the White House for Trump's ambassador to the United Kingdom. And she would not have gotten the job at the White House without his positive recommendation. So it's important to bear in mind that Jennifer, along with the other Foreign Service officers that are being brought up to Capitol Hill under subpoena, are doing this as career officials, not as a partisan exercise. And it is incredibly damaging to the service for us to start labeling people with certain, partisan agendas, because ultimately they have to carry that label when they go back out to the field, deal with foreign leaders. It's just damaging to our national security.
She's already testified behind closed doors, as you know, testified that she felt that the president's request of the Ukrainians struck her as unusual, struck her as inappropriate as well. How significant do you think her public testimony is going to be?
Well, what I think you will see both from Jennifer as well as from Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is a bit more circumspect perspective. I mean, both of them are mid-level officers, unlike the ambassadors and the senior official, George Kent, who testified last week. They have a long career still ahead of them, and I think it's important for them not to go too far out on a limb. But that being said, they were at the White House, on the National Security Council. They saw and heard things that those at the State Department and out in Kiev did not.
You have a new piece that's up on NBC Think, and in the piece you argue that the impeachment hearings eviscerate the president and show how he broke the rules of diplomacy. It reads in part, "There are regular things that U.S. emissaries do that involve quid pro quo or conditions." When is it okay for a diplomat to put conditions on something, and why is it different from what the president seems to have done here?
Let's look at how these exchanges work in diplomacy. We ask for certain conditions, access for our military forces, access to certain political leaders or decisions, but we always look out through a process and weigh those asks against other interests that the United States have. None of that took place here. I actually would go so far as to call this a good old-fashioned shakedown. This was not a quid pro quo. This was not something that was in the U.S. interest. It was President Trump himself saying, "I want this," and it gets really dangerous in diplomacy when all of a sudden we're doing personal favors for the president.
President Trump's ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, as you know, set to testify publicly this week. Put this into context for us. In your experience, Sondland's role in all of this, unusual?
He's kind of a buffoonish character. I mean, he got to Brussels and he started speaking out of turn, talking to other ambassadors, EU officials, in a manner that's not just undiplomatic, it's unproductive. I mean, he was out there doing apparently $1 million renovation of his residence. This is not how you behave if you want to have influence as an ambassador. And look, all along we've had, under the Obama administration, prior administrations, political appointees as ambassadors. But you don't go giving these political appointees with very little experience in diplomacy responsibility for something especially outside of their remit. And that's exactly what Trump did with Sondland on Ukraine, and clearly he's made a mess of it.
Brett Bruen. Brett, thank you. Thank you for your insight, sir.
Good to be with you.